we're simultaneously, we're giving our kids messages about stand up for yourself. And we're giving our kids messages about be direct. Don't let people treat you badly. Care about justice and fairness. But then with Black kids, parents of Black kids have to say, except if you're with a cop, don't stand up for yourself.
Hello, dear friends and damn givers. This is the Let's Give a Damn podcast. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm your host, Nick LaPara, and this is the show where I sit down for meaningful conversations with people who saw something wrong in the world and gave a damn about it. I truly hope today's conversation gives you hope and pushes you to give more damns than ever before. My guest today is a delightful damn giver named Kristen Howerton. Kristen is a blogger, author, single mom of 4 amazing children, family and marriage therapist, and according to her Twitter bio, a skilled catastrophizer. She is the founder of the popular blog Rage Against the Minivan, and I'm also pretty sure she's the founder of the Asshole Parent hashtag on Instagram. You should find some of her posts on Instagram about that. They're amazing. Kristen is the author of Rage Against the Minivan, Learning to Parent Without Perfection, her brand new memoir. Glennon Doyle, New York Times bestselling author and founder of Together Rising, had this to say about Kristen and the book. Filled with humor, vulnerability, and heart, Kristen writes unflinchingly about what it means to be raising children in today's world and how to liberate ourselves from the myth of perfect motherhood. I've read it. It is all of those things. And during our chat today, we talk about growing up as a pastor's daughter, eventually marrying a pastor, divorcing said pastor, bringing 4 kids into their home over the short span of 4 years, what it's like to raise 2 biological white daughters and 2 adopted Black sons, how to raise anti-racist damn-giving children, and so much more. She's an absolute delight of a human, and I know you're going to love our conversation. So let's dive in, shall we? As always, my email is hello@letsgiveadamn.com. Email me anytime and for any reason. I'd love to hear from you. And here's my conversation with Kristen Howerton. Let's go. Kristen Howerton, welcome to the Let's Give a Damn podcast.
Well, I'm glad to be here.
My wife has been a huge fan of yours for years. She's been reading your blog for years. You've encouraged her in so many ways. So I just wanted to make sure I tell you that right here at the beginning because, she's, you obviously come across super authentically. It's why you've been able to build kind of a community around the kinds of things you write about. And she's been blessed in so many ways by your stuff. So just wanted to get that out there. She's sending a big hello from Nashville to, you're in California, right?
Yes.
Perfect.
Well, hello back.
There you go. And I'm glad your team reached out, honestly, because I've been wanting to have more conversations on this show about raising kids who give a damn, raising anti-racist kids, and raising kids just in general in this super weird time in history.
Yeah.
Sometimes I have to keep myself focused and I have to keep everything in context, right? Because I just finished, I don't know if you know the author Jennifer Wright. She wrote a book called Get Well Soon, and it's about all the plagues throughout history and the people that fought them. And I just finished that book. And so I'm reading through this book about all these ridiculous plagues, the bubonic plague and the plague that took down like 10 million people in Rome and the Spanish flu. So on the one hand, I feel very fortunate to be living during this time when there aren't bodies being piled up in the street because we don't know what the hell we're doing. Right. It is a good time in history to be alive, but along with sort of these technological and medical and advances and otherwise, we also we just know more, right? We know more. So you and I'm in Nashville, I'm in Tennessee, you're in California, and we in real time are seeing this shit in Kenosha, Wisconsin right now, right? So that never happened before. It was always delayed by hours or days or weeks or months, or they never heard about it at all. So it's just a weird time to raise kids. So I'm super excited to get to work out some of this stuff with you today. So let's dive right in. I've got so much that I want to talk with you about. Your book, which we'll allude to it a little bit, and we can talk as much or as little bit as you want, but we'll definitely link to it. This memoir of sorts, Rage Against the Minivan. Wonderful, wonderful book. So you're an author, blogger, single mom, family and marriage therapist, and according to your Twitter bio, a skilled catastrophizer. So I don't want to brag, but I'm really good at it. I can see that. I can see that already. I can see that in your writing, and we'll get into more of that, very soon. But your story involves, so many just like critical things that so many people go through. You talk about your infertility, you talk about divorce, you talk about loneliness, you talk about being what it was like to be a pastor's daughter and eventually a pastor's wife, adoption, all of these huge things. So why don't you go back as far as you want to, but sort of give us, and we'll talk along the way, and I have plenty of questions and things to interject, but I'd love to just hear your story in your own words, like what were the, who, what, when, where, and whys of becoming who you are today? And I know that's a super jam-packed question, but I'd love to dive into stories because along the way, inevitably we'll see, we'll see dots connected that show us how you turned out the way that you did and the things you write about and the kinds of things you talk about.
Yeah. I mean, well, I grew up in a very conservative, very fundamentalist Christian home. My dad was a pastor, and I kind of struggled in that through high school a bit, was a little bit rebellious, but ultimately decided to go to Bible college where, surely that would straighten me out and get me,
of course,
rather than looking at the denomination or the religious, environment around me. It's just like, surely I'm broken and somehow externally something can fix. So I went to Bible college, wasn't a great fit. But I did end up getting married during college, pretty young, as one does at Bible college.
Been there, done that.
Yeah. I mean, the jokes about getting your MRS degree for women or, a ring by spring. I mean, it's true. There is a culture at Bible college that you get married in college, while you're there. You don't need to think about things like, have I lived on my own before? Or
have I done everything I wanted to?
Yeah.
Like, a very valid thing that so many it's not that they reject it. They're just force fed this idea of like your ultimate goal as a woman, especially in those circles, not in all Christian circles, but in those circles, because that's the one I grew up in, it was your one primary, the biggest goal you could and should have is to be a wife, to be a mother. Right. So get it done as quickly as possible. Don't go out there and fuck around. Don't go out there and like pursue your dreams, because you'll just end up having to squash dreams that are already in process so that you've accomplished to go do the thing that God put you on this earth to do. Right.
That's right. And I felt that, I was I've always been a person who runs a little anxious, and I wanted to lock that marriage thing down because, like, as you said, that seemed like the most important thing. And so rather than giving it the time and, the perspective that kind of a decision should require, it was just like, oh, here's a guy, I'll get married. So I got married very young. He was a pastor. We were involved in a mega church, a big mega church in California for, good 15 years. And I was the dutiful pastor's wife. And then just along the way, I began to feel a little uncomfortable with some aspects of the church. I'm still a Christian. I would still call myself a Christian, but, I was uncomfortable with, I had some LGBT friends who were fired from staff when they came out. I was uncomfortable with, some of the silence on issues of social justice and race. I was uncomfortable that we were this big mega church in what's actually a very diverse area of Orange County, but our church and staff was all white, and I was asking questions about that and not feeling like I was getting any dialogue. Or, in fact, I was feeling like I was getting frustration for asking the question. So ultimately, we ended up leaving church staff, and then we ended up leaving the church. Along the way, as you mentioned, biggest goal in life, be a mom. And so I'd gotten a marriage and family therapy degree. I was a therapist, but finally okay, I'm ready to do this, to be a mom, and just had a difficult journey in that too. It was things where I dealt with infertility, and then I dealt with recurrent pregnancy loss. And then we decided to adopt, and our first adoption was delayed by 3 years. Wow. So, and I write about all those details in the book, but just suffice it to say, my journey, even to being a mom, was very fraught and very unexpected. And then, as is the case for many moms, just becoming a mom was, it was more difficult, I think, than I expected as well. So yeah, I mean, and now I have 4 teenagers.
That's insane. You're scaring me. We have 3 children, 5, 7 and 8. And for 3 months of the year, they're 1 year apart. So like in a month, it'll be 6, 7, and 8 for a few months before the oldest, gets a little bit older. Yeah, it's insane. And so you have 2 biological white daughters.
Yes.
And you have 2 adopted Black sons, right?
That's
and
right.
I first of all, super beautiful family. Like, again, I've followed you all on social media, and I've loved sort of seeing them. Now your sons look like grown adults. Like they're so tall and
they're
like
so grown big. Men.
Yeah, exactly. And we're going to get into that. We're going to get into some of this as we talk about raising anti-racist kids in this environment that we're in. I think there's some real things to talk about there. So you talk about you were experiencing you wanted to just have kids and you experienced infertility. Was adoption ever part of the plan, or was that something like, hey, we want to have kids so badly that if we can't have our own, adoption's obviously not even it's not a backup plan, but it's a wonderful alternative to having our own, right? Is that how it was, or did you always want to adopt?
I actually had always wanted to adopt. That's very much how I wanted to build my family. And, my husband at the time, I'm now divorced, but my husband, was just like, no, I think we should just have kids of our own, which is the thing a lot of people say, have kids of our own and then adopt. I mean, which of course, like my children I've adopted are my own, but
yes, right.
That's just, we didn't totally agree on how to start. And, I was like, okay, let's do the pregnancy thing. That seems more conventional. That seems like what most people do. So, a couple years into that journey of just me not being able to stay pregnant, I was like, I want off this roller coaster. I'm open to adoption. This isn't a second choice for me. So I don't want to keep doing this thing that's so painful when there's waiting children. I'm totally open to it. I don't need to sell. I don't need to grieve and then change course. Like, I'm happy to adopt. And so we did. And so that's what we did. So we set out to adopt from foster care. My oldest was adopted through foster care. But, as does sometimes happen, he came to our home when he was 6 months old. We were to be his foster parents, but it was supposed to be what's called a fast track adoption, meaning his parental rights had already been terminated. Like, they had actually been, due to stuff that happened before he was even born. Like, it was determined he would not be with his birth parents when he was born, but a relative emerged. And so he's living with us. He's our foster child. We think we're supposed to adopt him in 6 months. And this drags out for 3 years. Maybe the relative's coming. No, they haven't filled out paperwork. Wait, they're back. No, they haven't, just back and forth. So it was a very, very stressful time of being a new mom, but not knowing if my son was my forever son or just a foster kid that I would have in family photos, and say goodbye to.
We have, I can identify with that a little bit. We also grew up in, I think, probably similar circles. When we started to have kids, we got married in 2008, and in 2009 or 10, we decided that we wanted to start a family. My wife wanted, really quickly to start having kids. And we had a very complicated, our first go at trying to have kids was very complicated. It was a failed molar pregnancy. So it's different than
very stressful.
Yeah. It's very just weird and stressful.
Yeah.
And there's so many unanswered questions. And
Yeah.
even when the doctor says, we have no idea what this is, and they have to go study. They literally had to go study up and brush up on their molar pregnancy, information. Cause they were like, we haven't seen one of these in forever. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So that was super stressful. And then them telling us, you can't get pregnant for a year. That was super stressful too. Cause it was different than a normal miscarriage where they say, give it a few weeks, then try again. They were like, don't get pregnant for a year. This is going to happen again.
Yeah.
That was super wild. So then we had planned on adopting our second child. We always talked about wanting to adopt. At the time, we were part of this evangelical community. You'll know all about where we were. We were part of the John Piper world at that point. I was all in that for a few years, helping lead all the stuff over there. And there's a lot of I think one of the cool things that we saw happening there was a lot of people like really embracing the, bringing kids in need out of the foster care system and out of the adoption system. Like so many families had wonderful, it was a really supportive community in that way. So we decided, well, if we can't get pregnant for a year, let's try to adopt. And so we tried to adopt domestically, and we went through the whole process. You know the drill. And, we're $10,000-$15,000 in. Birth mother chooses us. She's going to have a baby in a month. She's 13. Horrible situation. She was abused and blah, blah, blah. Terrible situation. So we're like kind of happy that we're able to do this. We go down there to meet her. She's got 72 hours to give up the baby, to sign the papers. And she decides that literally hour 71, we're taking the baby. So it was, oh my God, it was like the most stressful 3 days because we thought, their lawyer had talked to our lawyer. Everything's a given. Like you come take the baby and we'll sign right away. And then she decided not to. She started, maternal instincts kicking in. Like she just wanted to be with her baby. And the doctors kept saying, don't keep asking for the baby, although you have the legal right to. And she kept asking for the baby. And of course, she's 13. So her mom is literally like in her mid 30s. So her maternal stuff's still going. So she's a grandma / she's feeling like mama stuff going on. And that was really hard. Like, and it didn't drag on for years. There wasn't this like constant uncertainty. And it was still, not a week goes by that I don't think about that little girl. Is she okay?
Gosh.
13-year-old mama, like not in just not a good situation. And now she's 10 and the mama's 23. Like, so all that to say, like, I get a little bit of what you're talking about, and I can't imagine that length of time, that long, just waiting and wondering, like, is this going to be over? I have a bunch of friends right now that are in the middle of adoption situations and foster situations, and just the sitting on pins and needles all the time must feel just super stressful and terrible, and you just want it to be over, right?
Oh yeah. I would say, it was traumatic. It was traumatic to be bonding with and parenting and loving a kid. And then every night as I'm laying him down to sleep, wondering, will he be here next year? Will he? And then, I ended up having a biological child when he was about 1. And I remember thinking, when we'd go to get family photos taken, like this horrible feeling of like, do we keep him in the photos? Or like, what if he goes back and then all the family photos that we took in these 3 years have this kid that my daughter doesn't recognize when she's older, just it put you in so many horrible, scenarios of thinking through the worst, and it was, I think that is probably where some of my catastrophizing skills
naturally
were magnified, because you're just always thinking like you're having to brace yourself for an inevitable loss, which, that doesn't work in life. Like we don't our losses are not minimized by like practicing grief before something bad happens, but we do it anyway,
Yeah. So your second son also adopted. So am I getting the order correct? So it was son, daughter, or was it son, son, daughter?
It's confusing, and to the point that my editor had me we did an illustrated timeline in my book because it's that confusing.
I remember it now. Yeah.
Yeah.
I got
my
the book
editor
right here.
would be like, I can't remember the order. So the order is very strange. Jafta became our foster child when he was 6 months old. Then I had a daughter while he was still our foster child. Then we adopted him when he was 3.5. Then we set out to adopt another child from Haiti. But while he was still living in Haiti, I had another biological child. And then Kembe, who's older than the biological child, joined our family last at 3.5. If that makes sense.
No,
so their birth order is out of order with when they came into the family.
Yeah, totally get it. So his name Kembe, is that what you said? Yeah. So Kembe is from Haiti.
He's from Haiti.
Tell me about that, because this was in 2010, right?
Yeah.
When the earthquake happened there. You were there.
We were there. Yeah.
Tell me about that. So you're in a different place. Was that when you were picking him up, or was that one of the trips? Because this was also a
No.
long, drawn out process as well, right?
Yeah, it wasn't when I was picking him up. So that, I mean, the joke is that we just couldn't do an adoption in less than 3 years. And so we had adopted Jafter from foster care. That took 3 years. And I was like, I can't go through this again. I thought I would adopt all my kids from foster care. But after doing it once, I was like, I can't do this again. Like, I can't put myself into this system. And I still fully support and wish that people would. But for me, like, one was all I could do at that point with, just the other traumas going on. And so I thought that, adopting internationally would be less risky, it would be more straightforward, which of course it never is. And so we set out to adopt Kembe. Also met him when he was 6 months old, but he was still living in an orphanage. And we set out to adopt him when he was 6 months old, and he came home at 3.5. So it was another 3-year adoption process. But so the result is that we were visiting him a lot because we wanted him to know us.
Sure.
So that when he came home, we were familiar. And so it was just, I had taken a trip down just to visit. And I had taken my youngest daughter because at that time she was 11 months old and we were still nursing. So I had to take her with me. And so it was just she and I and Kembe, and we were in a guest house and the earthquake happened. So it was very traumatic, very devastating. And I ended up having to leave him because his adoption still wasn't finalized.
Crazy.
Yeah, it was really sad. And, it was just one of those scenarios where, I wanted to stay, and because the country's in tumult, and his orphanage they were sleeping outside because people were too scared to go back in buildings, because that's how everyone was dying.
Yeah.
People were dying from being crushed under poorly built buildings. And so nobody wanted to go inside. I slept outside. I slept outside in Haiti for a week after the earthquake before I was evacuated home. I didn't want to go inside either. Because there were all these aftershocks happening, and the aftershocks were huge earthquakes in and of themselves. So I left him sleeping in a driveway in Haiti, and just the worst conditions. And it was really scary. But my daughter was sick, and we don't live there. We were a drain on resources, so we came back to the States, and then he ended up coming home about a week later. Through a humanitarian parole process that allowed kids in process of being adopted to go to their families.
Expedite the whole process.
Yeah.
Which was, and I remember that. I didn't know that you all were a part of that, but I think I actually have friends that were able to get their children quicker because of that process. They were obviously just trying to speed everything up and clean up all the messes that were being made because of the earthquake. Well, I'm glad. So I'm so glad for the makeup of your family, but I've got so many questions about. So the majority of people listening to this podcast are probably 75% are millennials. They're like me. They've got younger kids, somewhere in there, somewhere from like newborn all the way to like preteen and teens at this point. We have some older folks and some younger people as well that listen to the podcast. So most of them are in my age range, and we're all trying to figure out how the hell do you raise kids that give a damn in this time, right?
Yeah.
Because what I've seen most of my work, this podcast and my company and all the different projects that we have along with the podcast, we've been around for about 3 years, and we're doing a lot more stuff now. And I always come back to one of my I feel like the main thing that I'm doing with my work is helping grownups unlearn a lot of like terrible shit that they learned growing up.
Yeah.
Whether it was growing up in like conservative evangelicalism or just not having, or just the generation of our parents not giving a shit about meaningful conversations with the kids about race, about LGBTQ stuff. Like they didn't come up. We don't talk about them.
Nope.
Because they didn't believe they existed, or they didn't agree with it, or whatever. They didn't think it was a real thing.
Yeah.
And so now you have this whole generation of people that are having to unlearn a whole bunch of stuff so that they can learn the right stuff, right?
Yes.
That's what I see a lot of my work is just pushing people to like be okay with deconstructing, be okay with unlearning, and then be intentional about relearning, about reconstructing, right? But ideally, in this generation, we can do a much better job raising our kids to avoid all the shit that we're going through now, right? Like that's,
Yeah.
when I think about my role as a parent, there's this wonderful quote. I think I jotted it down correctly, but you said in the book, if I had to sum up motherhood in one philosophical statement, it would be this: they come out of the womb as narcissists, and you have 18 years to try to change that. If by the time they move out of the house, they are able to consider others with some level of empathy, attend to the feelings of others, and see the world outside themselves and the people who inhabit it as valid and important, you've done your job.
Yeah.
And I resonate so deeply with that. When people ask, like, because we have, I am parenting my kids way differently than I grew up being parented. I love my parents. They're alive. They're well. They've changed so much in the last 20 years, but growing up was terrible. I mean, I was physically, emotionally, spiritually, mentally abused, all the leads except sexually. That never happened, thank God. But like all the other things like happened to me over and over and over again because it was the right thing to do. And we've got to like make sure you're in line and make sure you're obeying and make sure you're playing the part of good Christian, son, good missionary kid. You're a pastor's kid. I was a missionary kid. And now I think, like, I feel so sorry for my parents that they felt like that was their role as a parent versus spending these 18 years with my kids, finding good things and saying, what do you think of that? Like, what do you think of that? Let's talk about that. Finding bad things and saying, what do you think of that? Like, let's talk about that. And just kind of prodding them. I'm not going to force them. I can't force them, but just like kind of prodding them and like moving them over and saying like, hey, what about that? Like, what's going on there? And and so far I've already seen my kids display like so much more empathy for all people, way more than I ever did when I was younger. I was a judgmental little shit because my parents taught me to be that way. Yeah. So in light of that sort of context I just shared, like, let's talk about raising anti-racist kids. You have two biological white. I'm going to take the biological and adopt it out. They're all yours, and I understand that and love that. So you have two white daughters and two black sons. Yeah. And all of them, if I'm getting their ages right, because you said they're all like preteens or teens now, they have been able to witness in some way, shape, or form the horrific nature of the horrific turn that race has taken in the last few years. Not that anything has changed, but now it's being filmed, right? We've got everything from the Trayvon Martins to the Eric Garners to all these things throughout the years. And now in the last few months, we've got Ahmaud Arbery in March. We have Breonna Taylor in April, in March, Ahmaud Arbery in April. We have George Floyd in May. We had Rayshard Brooks in June. Like we have, I mean, literally it's every few weeks. And now just over the last couple days, Jacob Blake shot 7 times in the back, posing no threat to cops in front of his 3 sons. Yeah. How do you deal with this? How do you talk to your children? Because it's going to be different for most people. More and more people are adopting, and that's wonderful. But like most family makeup is like we have biological children, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever it is. So they're not having to like toe the line of, I don't just have white kids or I don't just have black kids. I have both. So what's been your experiencing? And now, since a few years ago, you're doing this as a single mom, right? So kind of go wherever you want with that. But I'm just super interested in like how you have navigated these very tricky and important waters with your kids.
Well, it's interesting because I think every parent needs to be talking to their kids about race. I mean, I know that you agree with that, so I don't think it's just that, oh, you have black kids, so you have to figure out how to have these conversations. All of these, like every child probably over the age of 12 or 13 should know the names you just mentioned and the story behind them. All of us should be having those conversations with all of our kids. But then what gets added, parenting black kids is just the conversations around their own personal safety. So, not just that this is happening, but like this is happening and it could happen to you. And so, we have a lot of conversations around how do you respond when you have interactions with law enforcement, and it's a lot of safety conversations. It's a lot of conversations about, the most important thing is that you come home alive. And so what that means is that, you have to behave in ways that other people have the entitlement not to. I mean, if you have watched the footage of what happened in the last few days, the man was walking away from a police officer. He wasn't resisting an arrest. He was just walking back to his car. And I think of all of the times that I've been pulled over, as a young white woman and just got mouthy with a cop, or, was sarcastic, or, and it's like,
Yep.
Black children, Black adults just do not have the entitlement to do that. And so we talk a lot about how to get in the right frame of mind in that scenario. And it sucks too. Here's what's tough about it. We're giving our kids messages about stand up for yourself. And we're giving our kids messages about be direct. Don't let people treat you badly. Care about justice and fairness. But then with Black kids, parents of Black kids have to say, except if you're with a cop, don't stand up for yourself. Like, I've literally said this to my kids before. You know what? If they want to arrest you, just let them take you in, and then call me, and I'll come and we'll deal with it.
Wow.
But like, you would never say that to a white kid. Just let yourself be arrested. It's not that big of a deal for you. Like, but you have to say that, because it's like, you know what? If you resist arrest, you could end up dead. So don't fight back. Don't stand up for yourself. If it's not fair, let it work itself out later. Like, I've told my kids that so many times, like, don't get mad in that situation. Think about how we will deal with that later, because you can't try your case with a guy with a gun in his hand. That doesn't work. Like, you let the police do what they're going to do, and then we'll let, hopefully, the justice system kick in. And I tell my boys all the time too, like, if you're in that situation, you just imagine you're a mom suing everyone later.
Amazing.
But like that, you can't get angry. So these are really difficult and fraught conversations. And, it's a hard burden to put on a 12, 13-year-old kid, to know that his body is a liability as he walks around. I mean, it's devastating, which is why everyone should care about this, because nobody should have to feel like that.
What's wild, Kristen, is that we are not in, I grew up in Guatemala. So I grew up in Guatemala pre 9/11. It was one of the most dangerous countries in the world.
Yeah.
Like, you're in a country like that. I mean, just poverty, corruption, the ending of, like, a civil war is ending. So there's so much violence. I mean, I've seen people be murdered. I've seen people, they tried to kidnap me once. Like, I saw some crazy stuff. But then you don't expect for that to happen in the most exceptional, and I'm using air quotes for those that can't see it, the most exceptional country in the world. That, we're the leader, and we're the leader in wealth, we're the leader in this, we're the, all these things that are not actually true when you look at the numbers. But our government, so many people believe this is such an exceptional country where we're beyond race, and we're beyond that. And it's no longer a problem. And there isn't systemic racism, and there aren't systemic problems within the policing system, although they've had problems since literally their inception.
Yes.
And you shouldn't have to. And this is the constant conversation that I have with my wife about, like, do we just leave? Do we just expatriate somewhere? Like, let's go somewhere that has figured out how to create. No place is perfect. I understand that. I've spent time in 30 plus countries. Like, they all have stuff, but there are countries that have figured out how to live in a more equitable, just society that does value the most people the most of the time, And here, like, we have this conversation. Should we go, or do we stay and fight for like what we want? Like, this it might not change by the time we die, but at least we got it a little bit closer, right? Or do we just leave and say, fuck it, like, I'm out. I can't do this, right? Both of those are valid things, but it's a constant conversation, even for me, like a Latino with I don't have super dark skinned kids. Like I don't have to tell my kids, like, don't die today. Like, don't die today. Like, do whatever they want you to do so that you don't die. Like, that is a wild conversation to have. And it is. And you tell the story of one time you heard a noise in your backyard, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you called the cops because you thought it was an intruder.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until it was too late, too far into the
Mm-hmm.
process, that you realized, I have 2 black sons that look like grown men
Yeah.
in my home.
Yeah.
And because they didn't just stay in the backyard, right? They wanted
Right.
to come in the house and check things out. So tell me
Yeah.
about that story. And like, at what point did you realize, oh shit, like it's too late. They're here. Like, I pray to God that they don't see my sons, because this could go really poorly. This could take a turn for the worse really quickly.
Well, this is the part of the story that's cringy to admit, but I think it's important for white parents raising Black kids, because we always have blind spots. Like, no matter how much anti-racism
Sure.
work we've done, we are going to have blind spots. That didn't hit me until my kid ran down the hallway. Like, it should have hit me before, right? But and that is a critical difference, like between a white parent and a Black parent. In talking to my Black friends and the way that they have grown up viewing law enforcement. To me, growing up, the messages I got around law enforcement is you can always trust them. They're always the helpers. They're always benevolent. They will always show up and help you. Whereas, my Black friends have a little more distrust, and it's legitimate distrust. It's not paranoia, it's legitimate distrust. And I never had that. I never had that distrust of thinking about how are they going to interact with me or with my kids, because my kids are Black. And so when they showed up and they wanted to come in the house, I was like, yeah, great. I'm scared. Come in the house and look around. And then they're looking around, and one of my kids gets woken up and he runs down the hallway, and he was only like 10 at the time, but he was, 5'5" at the time.
Yeah.
And so he runs down the hallway, and I just have this thought of like, oh my gosh, what am I thinking? Like, they would have, if they'd seen him, which they didn't, they were in a different part of the house. If they'd seen him and they're looking for an intruder, of course they would think it was him. And so that was a big, big lesson to me about my own privilege, and really thinking through as a white person how I interact with cops. And it's been a lesson to me. And I think that that's a lesson that all white people need to learn, because we're so quick to call the cops. But if Black people are involved, if Mexican people are involved, I just think it's really important to think through, like, do I want to risk bringing law enforcement into this situation where their presence could actually escalate and worsen things, right? Like, is this worth me calling someone?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of conversations happening over the last few months where it's like, don't call, if a Black person is involved in any way, don't call the cops. Like, try to do everything you can.
Try to do everything.
Whether they're the victim or the perpetrator, like, try to do everything you can, because there's a good chance that it's not going to end well. And again, this is not new. I don't think the police are getting any more racist than they've always been. It's always been a very systemically racist institution.
Yeah.
But now, we're just capturing it now on film. But like, don't call, like, so many times there's so many videos out there, more than I can stomach to watch, of people calling, there was the one the other day about the kids, they were like playing hide and seek. It was some sort of like a condo complex. There was a bunch of Black kids playing hide and seek, and this white woman called on these kids. I mean, they're like 5 or 6, but they're making noise. They're kids. They're going to make noise. And she called the cops because the parents were not with them, like at their side. They were sitting on their driveway watching the kids. Safe neighborhood. They're letting their kids do what every parent should feel comfortable letting their kids do. Go out and explore. Yeah. And you shouldn't have to worry about somebody calling the cops because you're not standing right beside your kid when you're watching them from your driveway. Like, that could have gone so poorly.
Yeah.
And not just could, it does so many times. So yeah, there's so much that even as a parent of non-Black kids, like I have to for my Black friends, like, there's just so much more to think about. I have so many amazing Black friends here in Nashville. We've only lived here a couple of years, and hopefully our time here is coming to an end. We do not like it, but I have so many amazing Black friends here, and like we protested downtown for well, I was there for a few days. They were there for 62 days, day and night, and they finally got the governor signed a horrifically like Jim Crow era law of Class E felony for protesting on state grounds overnight.
Oh my gosh.
Which ultimately they disbanded because the protesters left finally, because it's one thing to get arrested for a misdemeanor, right?
Sure.
For a sidewalk truck or whatever, but now they're making it a Class C felony. You could lose your right to vote. Horrible. Like literally, it feels like we're back in the 60s here sometimes.
Totally.
So Orange County, to the best of my understanding, I've been there quite a bit, but I don't know all parts of Orange County. Not known for, huge Black population.
No, it's not.
Not by and large. And so talk about all your kids, but your boys growing up, going to school, like were they able to be around a lot of other Black kids, or at least a very like inclusive, accepting environment where teachers knew how to interact with these conversations and stuff? Or what's their experience been in school so far?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think that the perception of Orange County from the television shows and the way it's portrayed in movies is that it's very white. But Orange County ultimately is a cluster of very diverse cities, some of which are very white. Yeah. And then some of which are like not white at all. And we live in a more diverse city of Orange County. And so the school that my children attend is predominantly Mexican American. And so all my kids are minorities at their school. But we live in an area we have many Mexican Americans, Persian Americans, lots of Asian Americans, but the Black population is still really small. So there's still not a lot of Black people. So, my kids, they will say, like, I remember saying to them, like, do you feel like we should move? How are you feeling? And they're like, well, we're the only Black kids, but we're not the only brown kids,
Sure.
So I think that they do relate to other kids of color. But what I've had to do, in an area where there is such a small Black population, is really dive into our local Black community and figure out how to get them involved. And so, when they were younger, it looked like they were in an all Black Boy Scout troop, or we went to a Black church. Now they're a part of what's called 100 Black Men of Orange County. And that's an organization. It's a nationwide organization.
Amazing.
It's mentoring, it's getting kids prepped for college. Their whole motto is what they see is what they'll be. And so it's just an incredible group of Black men who are just putting the time in. And so for me, it's just been about really putting them in all Black spaces in the ways that I can, in the ways that I can find, making sure that they have experiences on the regular where they're not in the minority, where they're among other people, and that they've had the chance both to know adults and then kids their own age. And then, making sure that my own friend group is diverse has just been really important to me too. And not in a tokenism way,
right.
But just, because I mean, there's Black moms at my kids' school that I'm like, I don't think we really click. And then there's Black moms that I'm like, oh, I really want to be friends with you, but just prioritizing, making sure that I'm prioritizing, like having a diverse group of friends so that they are growing up seeing all kinds of people in their own home.
I'm glad you brought up your sons being mentored within this 100 Black Men group, right? What they see is what they will be. That's an incredible motto.
Yeah.
It's so true. And what I love about that is I think there's an interesting conversation happening. It's not new, but I think it's been happening for a long time. Is a lot of people think that Black fathers are disproportionately more absent than that. They're in the fact that they're absent is attributed to they're lazy. They don't give a shit. They're like going out and doing, and that's fundamentally not true. I mean, as I look at my friend group, and I have a very diverse friend group as well, the Black fathers that I know are some of the most attentive, loving, faithful fathers out there. What's happening and what people don't want to, and so many Americans reject. I mean, a lot of my Christian white male friends, and I use the term friends really loosely during these days, to be honest, I really have to wade through, like, how close of a friend are you if we can't unite on this fundamental truth that systemic racism is still alive and well.
I hear you.
Right.
Yeah.
So I, it's kind of, I have a wonderful friend that I've known for years that the other day, he he never chimes up in any of my social media stuff except for when it's something about systemic racism. And he chimes in and he has all this data and all these, these black men that don't believe that systemic racism is real. And I got to the point where I said, bro, we are not interacting on this topic anymore. Never again. Like, no more. I don't trust your judgment. We can talk about family. We can talk about beer. We can talk about cigars. We can talk about all the other stuff we like. No more on systemic racism, because I don't trust you. I don't trust your judgment. Right. So we're having to make all these calls. But back to my original point, like, I have seen so many, faithful black fathers. I've seen so many faithful black men that are amazing. And what we have is what we have is as a result of systemic racism is all of these fatherless homes, not all of them, so many of them, because there are some shitty black fathers and there's shitty white fathers, right? Like, there's shitty fathers all across the board, but so many of them, they're in prison for smoking weed on their porch. Totally. Something that I can do and do many nights on my porch. Like, I, even as a little bit darker skinned Latino, like, I'm never going to get stopped and asked what I'm smoking on my porch. Never, ever, 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 ever. But when you have 5 times the amount of police presence in a urban neighborhood and you're looking for crimes, you're going to find one. And obviously, there's so much going on there, and weed should not be illegal anyway. But like, that's just so much of it. Is you have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of black men that should be with their families that are now in prison for things that did not merit a prison sentence.
Right.
You have the one the other day from New Orleans where the guy's 23 years into a sentence for stealing those hedge clippers. And obviously he had a record, and he had other, I shouldn't say obviously, he had a record, he had other things that he had done, but he was in prison with a life sentence for stealing. For allegedly. He says, they're my wife's, like, these are my wife's hedge clippers in my van. And they said they stole them, and now he's in prison for 23 years and counting now. So much of that is happening. And so I love, long-winded way of saying, I love this 100 Black Men organization you talk about. I want to look into it, because I mean, if there's one you said it's nationwide. If there's one in my area, I want to push my friends and, toward that as well. That's really amazing.
Oh, it's incredible. But yeah, I mean, as you say, I think, when you really look at the data on Black fathers and even, crime in the Black community, because people like to bring that up, if people are interested in talking about that, then they really need to do the work to understand it. And if you do the work to understand it, all of it stems back to systemic racism and to oppression, right? All of it. I mean, and here's the thing, if you don't think it stems back to systemic racism and oppression, then the other alternative is that you think that there is something inherently like bad about inhabiting Black skin. So, which is racist. Like,
super racist.
That is ultimately what racism is to think, well, a community of people are poor fathers or more criminal because they have more melanin in their skin. No, that can't possibly be the answer.
It's the worst kind of racist.
Right. So then we have to look at, if we don't believe that, if we don't think someone is inherently criminal because they have more melanin, then we have to go, why is the crime rate higher? And then we look at, well, let's look at the connection between poverty and crime. Because you've lived in Guatemala, poverty and crime are inexplicably connected.
Very.
It has nothing to do with skin tone. It has to do with poverty. And then we go, well, why are Black Americans living in more poverty? And then the answer is not that hard to see when we talk, when we go back 100 years. Not even 100 years. Not even
100 years. I mean, it's a very frustrating conversation to have. And at this point, I've told my white friends 2 things. I've told them, and I've read all the books. Like, I've done the studying, I've read all the research, I've watched the lectures. Like, I get it. I understand it. It's real. There's no denying that. And if there is denying it, it's willful ignorance. But I always tell people, like, here's the 2 things during this season of life. Don't ask Black people to educate you. Don't ask them. Like, don't go to your friends and say, what's going on here?
Totally.
Because and the second is just do your homework, as you pointed out. Like, the reason you don't have to ask your Black friends to educate you is because the work has already been done. I mean, there are thousands of books and lectures and YouTube videos. And like, it's out there. You could spend an entire
Mhm.
year, 24 hours a day learning about this and never
Yep.
exhaust all the resources that are out there. So
Absolutely.
go do the homework. And so many of
Yeah.
them won't. My friend that I just talked about that I finally cut ties with, like I gave him so many things to go read. Um, both like books and lectures, and it was even like easy stuff like go watch When They See Us by Ava
Mhm.
DuVernay on Netflix, or 13th, the documentary. Like these are
Totally.
easy things. You don't even have to
Yeah.
go read, yet you don't have to go read Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow, or you don't have to
Right.
go read all these big idea
Heavy.
conversation.
Yeah.
Like start with a movie. Like I'm asking you to
Totally.
go watch a show that is going to show very explicitly that this exists.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad you brought up what you did at the beginning of your last point, which is if you don't believe that systemic racism is real, then you believe that Black people are lazier, more violent,
Yeah.
and worse off than white people, which is white
Right.
supremacy. And it's super, super
Absolutely.
racist. Like it's super racist.
Yeah.
So, and they're like, no, that's a false equivalency. That is no, it's literally the only two options there. Because if there's
It's the only two options.
something that's not causing these sorts of things to happen, you
Mhm.
add A and B and C comes out, then they have to be just worse people, right?
Right.
And they'll never admit that. Let's talk about color for a second.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to talk about this. I grew up in a sort of environment that denied that racism was a part of the world, and especially a part of the capital C church, the Christian
Mhm.
community. And so there was always this talk about um, colorblindness. Like I
Oh yeah.
don't see race. I don't
Yes.
see your color, which is super wild. I always think of that like comical clip in The Office when Jim pulls that prank on Dwight, and his their Asian friend pops in, and they switch even the picture, the family picture out. And I
Totally.
thought it was so wild. I mean, the Office is wild for a lot of reasons, but both good and bad. There's some weird stuff where I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe they got away with putting that in there. But during that little thing, he says, props to you, Dwight, for not seeing color. And I was like, now when I see that, I'm like, oh, that's so cringy
Mhm.
that they put that in there. And that's, The Office is, I don't know, it seems like it's probably a more progressive show or whatever, maybe not. But let's talk about, colorblindness. How has that conversation happen, and have your kids sort of experienced that from friends, from teachers, from
Mhm.
people in the church? Or have you had to wrestle through that? Was there a time when you even sort of thought that way? I don't know. So let's talk about that for a minute.
Well, I mean, I talk about that journey in the book, but yeah, I
Yeah.
absolutely thought colorblindness was what we were all aiming for. That's how I was raised. I mean, and it's my parents meant well, my parents had very racist parents, overtly racist parents. Like my grandfather would use the N-word. Horrible, horrible.
Wild.
And so to their credit, my parents were trying to steer that ship in a different direction, but it's like they kind of didn't have the best navigational system, and so they steered us to don't ever notice race. Like you can't
Mm,
notice it, right? And if you bring it up, there's something. And so we would just dance around the topic. And my parents did have very diverse friends, actually, and my sisters and I all had very diverse friends. We had diverse boyfriends, and that was never mentioned, but it was never mentioned, right? Like
yeah, right.
we don't see that your boyfriend's black. Like we can see nothing. And I think it was in college. I had to take as one does, I had to take like a Black Studies class. And, I think that's where I was challenged finally on like maybe being colorblind is not so great, because then
Yeah.
I'm not paying attention to the oppression that other people are experiencing or
Mm,
the microaggressions. Um, but yeah, I mean, I've had my own experiences with it. I'll tell you how that plays out as a white mom having Black kids is a lot of stories from friends about how, well, Mike, Johnny doesn't even notice that Jafta's Black. I mean,
mm,
he doesn't even notice, or, he didn't even know that Jafta was adopted because he didn't even know that he was Black. And it's like, your kid knows that first of
yeah.
all, your kid knows he's the color brown.
Right.
Like he can see his colors. He may not understand genetics yet.
Right.
But like it's not good that your kid doesn't see my kids. Like that's not a bragging point. That doesn't
Nope.
prove something about the world at all. And we all want to prove something about the world. Like we all want to say like kids are colorblind, but they are not. They're really not. And I'll say another thing that a lot of people may disagree with. I do not think racism has to be taught. I think that kids sort and color. And when one kid is a minority, you've seen the way that a group of boys can treat one girl in a circle. I just don't think it has to be taught. I think kids can act in very cruel ways on their own.
So dive into that some more. So does that go back to kind of your, like, how you believe people are even like born, like kind of their propensity toward, because a lot of people, we grew up in circles that said that everybody was born like super terrible, like super bad.
Yeah.
You're kind of like
Yeah,
screwed,
yeah, yeah.
You're screwed from the beginning, and you got
Original sin.
Yeah, exactly. Like the fall. And then there's some people that are like, no, everybody's born good, right? And then there's all these opinions everywhere in between. So if it's not taught, like where does it come from?
Well, here's what I think, and I'm going to take a more psychological, developmental perspective, because that's my background. I mean, I think people are born nuanced, and I don't think we're evil or terrible. Although I do joke that children are essentially narcissists, because we do come out of the womb literally only caring about our comfort and our feeding. I mean, that is true of infants. And then, hopefully we raise our kids to think about the world around them.
Yep.
But here's the thing that kids start to do at age 5, 6, 7, and this is developmentally appropriate. They start to sort, right? They start to identify, who am I and who is in the world? And I'm a boy, and I want to hang out with other boys. And if we are not intentionally teaching our kids to be anti-racist, they can start to sort on skin color too. And that they don't have to have parents in the KKK to do that. I've watched very lovely kids be like, let's just have the white kids only. And why do they do that? Is it because they've been taught racism? No, it's because they haven't been taught anti-racism. It's the same way kids will make fun of someone with glasses. And it's not because they have a mom who hates everyone with glasses. They've probably never been taught that. Kids are just sometimes terrible. They are, all kids, mine included.
I think this is an interesting conversation, and I agree with you, because I've gone all over the place and I have 3 little kids, so I'm very much like in the day-to-day seeing them act sometimes like they're like amazing. Like sometimes my kids surprise the hell out of me. Yeah. They're so kind and empathetic, and thankfully that is a majority of the time. Like we have been blessed with really good kids. They love all people. They, but, and it's a big but, because there are so many times when I'm like, holy shit, where did that come from?
Yeah.
Like my kids don't get, it has changed a little bit during the pandemic, but pre-pandemic, we were at 2 hours of screen time a week. They didn't get anything during the week. Saturday, they would get something, and maybe Sunday, like kind of a show or something educational. So we were like really good. And then the pandemic hit, and we're just trying to hold on for dear life. So now it's like, it's 60 to 90 minutes a day. Right. And we're still trying to make it good stuff,
but still pretty good.
Still pretty good. But so they don't get a ton of like outside. We're very intentional at this point, because they are sponges and so formidable. And like you said, like there's so many things going on. We're trying to put good things in front of them. And then sometimes they'll say or do something or react a certain way. And I'm like, where did that come from? There's no way that you've seen that here or possibly anywhere.
I know.
Where is this coming from? And it has to be coming from, they're sorting all this shit out, and they're both good and bad. And that's kind of wrestling inside of them to figure out, okay, how do I process through this? Again, could be big things like skin color or sexual orientation, or it could be small things like glasses. You know, like that kid with glasses, they look stupid. We don't hang out with that kid. Why?
Totally.
Like, where does that come from? It's so wild and confusing, but I like the approach of, because I don't like when we go on the one hand, they're terrible. Like they're terrible from birth, and they're just like, they're lost and horrible, and God needs to save them, or else they're just going to go destroy the world.
Right.
The next Jeffrey Dahmer, like sociopathic, killer. Or like, oh, they're angels and they're so good. And like, and they have to be taught, like you said, they have to be explicitly taught to be racist, or to be homophobic, or to hate this, or to love that. And I just don't see that actually playing out. That's a good thought. And it'd be nice if it was that clean and cut and dry, that like, oh, if we want good kids, we just have to teach them good things. And if we want bad kids, well, do the opposite. But that's just not how it plays out. which keeps us on our toes.
It does.
And it makes for a more, I guess, interesting parenting journey.
It does. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that the key there is, talking to our kids about racial difference at a really young age, and then watching them and then saying, hey, I noticed during this play date, that 2 kids came to the playground and they were Mexican and they had accents, and you guys didn't include those 2. Like really watching our kids. I mean, I think if parents would take the time to like really watch the social interactions of their kids, it's kind of shocking and surprising. I mean, I've watched all my kids leave someone out on gender. I've watched every single one of my kids do that, and then had to call them over and be like, I'm sorry, we're not doing a girls only club on the playground with one other boy. No. Don't be an asshole.
Yeah, there you go. Yes, I've said that a couple dozen, maybe 100 times.
Yeah.
Okay, so you've been divorced for a few years.
Yes.
And so you're raising, obviously I'm sure you're sharing the responsibility, but you're raising for a certain amount of the time 4 kids.
Yeah.
What have been, and I want to bring this up and spend a minute or two here, just because there are so many people listening right now that have experienced divorce for any number of reasons. And they are now raising kids, and they want to be super intentional at raising kids who give a damn, raising anti-racist kids, raising anti-homophobic kids, like all those things. They're trying to figure out how to do it. What have been some of the challenges of raising, and probably some of them are obvious, but like, what are some of the challenges of raising 4 kids as a single mom, and also doing that without that sort of dad figure, or not even dad figure, and or like just that helper in the house that doesn't necessarily mean you have to have that, but it is helpful. I mean, I applaud you for taking this on and doing it, because I need, like, in our circumstance with my wife, like, I can't imagine doing it without like running my career. I have, a couple companies and a nonprofit and all this work that we're doing, making a TV show. And I couldn't raise 3 kids. I couldn't even think about raising 3 kids doing that. So how have you been able to wrestle through that? What are some of the victories, the highs and the lows there?
I think one thing that I've had to do in order to pull it off is that I have had to pull myself out of that very traditional mom role. And I've really had to task my kids with learning to do things for themselves. Like, that's the only way it works. Like, if you're old enough to put your clothes in your own closet, then you can do your own laundry start to finish. Right. And I've had, and a part of that too has been me letting go of like, so then things aren't going to be nicely folded. Like, but I'm going to have to let go of that. Or my new routine now is, and my kids are older, granted, but I think we can underestimate kids and how much they can help. And we're so used to our own routines. But like on Sundays, I have my kids go through cookbooks and they plan what they're going to make that week. And then they text me and I order the groceries. And then they make full dinners, like full on dinners. Wow. Even my 11-year-old.
Love it.
So, I mean, they say necessity is the mother of all invention, but it's like, it's kind of true. It's like, I literally couldn't do it all. And the result is that my kids have become like very mature in a lot of ways, which is funny because in many cultures, I mean, this is a very kind of entitled American thing to be like, I've taught my kids to cook and do their own, because in many countries, kids are fetching water at 5,
right,
and working the family farm at 7, right? But we, myself included, in our American culture, we just really underestimate what kids are capable of and heap a lot of that responsibility usually on the mother. And I think for me, it's like, it's really pulled me out of that role, and it's given my kids a lot of gifts, because I think they'll walk out into the world as adults who already know how to do a lot of things that adults should know how to do.
Yeah. I as someone who has traveled quite a bit around the world, it is weird that our kids don't take on some of that stuff at an earlier age.
It is weird, right?
I mean, I've spent 6 weeks in the bush of Zambia, Africa, and these kids are, I mean, literally from the time they can speak, they're doing like not just chores, like to kind of like make them earn $1 or to like keep them busy. Like, they're a part of the livelihood of
they're running
home.
the household.
They're running the household. And so I love that you have used this as an opportunity to Your kids are going to benefit heaps
Oh
from
yeah.
learning how to not just cook their own meals, but like
Mhm.
choose the like pick the recipes, send you
Yeah.
the list. Like, all of that is teaching them a super ton. I love that. I think that'll be super helpful. I have a few friends right now that are kind of literally in their first couple of months of post-divorce and
Mhm.
trying to figure out the new norm with 2-3 kids and the back and forth and all that. And I think that will be, I mean, that's helpful for me. And I have the help here. And I think that's super great to, like, begin thinking about how my kids, they're already super helpful. They have chores, all that stuff. But to go back to what you said, like, they are capable of so much more than we
They are.
think
They really
think
are.
they are. Their kids are amazing.
Yeah, they are. But I think, a lot of it is lowering the bar too, and knowing, like, if I'm going to if I'm going to work and let a kid fully pull off dinner, it's not going
Totally.
to be the dinner that I maybe would have
No.
made.
No, it's
you know,
not some 4-star amazing
no.
meal. It might taste a little off and they might have missed an ingredient, but we're
Totally.
gonna eat it and they're learning.
Yeah.
Let's begin to wrap up here. I wanna kind of land the plane talking a little bit about faith real quickly,
Yeah.
because you started talking about, you grew up as a pastor's daughter, very conservative fundamentalist, sort of, and you even said your grandfather, I think,
Hmm.
used the N-word. Like, so there's some weird stuff going on there. But like, how have you, but then you also were explicit in pointing out, like, I would still call myself a Christian. And that obviously can mean a lot of things. Like, nowadays, right?
Hmm.
We're in this weird time. We didn't even talk that much about the pandemic or any of that. There's so much going on right now. But what we do see is, um, I had to make a very explicit, I had to make a very, not super public, but I just had to make it very explicit a few years ago, 2015, that I was leaving evangelicalism. I was
Yeah.
not leaving my faith.
Yeah.
I can't leave my faith. Like, it literally, I've tried to leave it. I've tried to get rid of it
Yes.
because sometimes my spiritual, brothers, sisters, aunts,
Uh-huh.
uncles, grandpas, and grandmas, they're shitty people. And by
Yeah.
sometimes, I mean so much of the time, so much pain and violence and abuse has been
Yeah.
inflicted by these people that are supposed to be defined by love God and love your neighbor, right?
Yeah.
And there's so much crazy stuff going on. But I tried to get rid of it. I couldn't. So I'm in it. I had to reconcile, like, I'm in it and I want to be in it, but it just, yeah, all those things that we have to, work through. So I kind of left the evangelical name for good, but trying to figure out this new norm and where I fit, and kind of stripping off. I was very intentional about my deconstruction and then immediately begin reconstruction process. Like, I didn't want to stay deconstructed because I actually wanted to
Mm-hmm.
stay in. A lot of
Yeah.
my friends deconstructed and then they're like gone. And
Right.
I don't blame them, but there was this deconstruction without an intentional, like, okay, now the house is down to the studs.
Mm-hmm.
Where do we begin rebuilding? Like, do we start
Mm-hmm.
with the bathroom? We start with this, like, where do we start
Totally.
rebuilding? I was intentional about that. And so here we are 4 years later and there's a lot going on, but like, how's that journey been for you?
Yeah, I think a lot like you. I mean, I think that I always wanted to reform. I didn't want to dismantle, right? And so it started with reforming my own faith. And I think for me, that looked like finding other Christians that I felt like I had, something in common with, that were on a similar trajectory. And then for me, it really looked like going back to the Bible and really looking at, like, who was this Jesus guy?
Mm,
And is what I have been taught by the American church really what he was living and teaching? Which I think the answer is it's not.
yeah.
There's a lot of discrepancy. And I personally, I mean, I might be a little radical for some, but my personal opinion is that Jesus was absolutely a socialist and was preaching a socialist gospel of taking care of one another and sharing amongst each other. And, that's how I read it. I read the Bible as this guy was, like, real into social justice and real into the marginalized and the
Mhm.
oppressed. And so for me, if that's his priority, that's my priority. So I feel like that's where I've kind of reconstructed my faith, is really going back to the personhood of Jesus. But when I really started doing that is when I started feeling more and more uncomfortable with the church,
Yeah.
like Big C
Well,
church.
yeah. Yeah, because the church doesn't look at all like what Jesus called us to do.
And what's wild is like, it didn't when I was going through this journey, which was like 2010, but like 10 years later, it looks even further away.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
well, yeah, 80. I mean, I thought it was kind of a fluke, some weird fluke that, bad dream that 80 something % of evangelicals were white evangelicals. That needs to be said, that were supporting this, this rapist, unfaithful, liar, cheater, like failed businessman, like, doesn't stand for anything that Christians should stand for.
Totally lacking integrity.
Him. So I was like, okay, maybe whatever, maybe he's going to change. I don't know. You couldn't pay me $1 million to vote for him, but I was like, well, maybe they're onto something that I don't see. I hope to God that they're right. Because here we go with 4 years, and we've seen 4 years later, nothing good has come from this.
No, it was as bad as we thought it could be.
It was as bad or worse than we thought it would be, and they're still supporting him. And so, it's really hard. I had a conversation, actually, the latest podcast on I don't usually interview this many Christians in a row, but I had Phil Vischer, the creator of VeggieTales, on last week. Because not for any other reason than, I don't know if you saw his viral video from a few weeks ago, the one called Race in America went viral. I mean, 10 million views. It's crazy. And he and I had a good little chat about that because I was like, the reason I haven't left, the reason I haven't wanted the whole thing to just blow up is I do believe that there are faithful Jesus followers in here that can still do good. Yeah. And will and are. And also, no matter what group, we're always gonna be part of a group, whether it's liberal or conservative, Democrat or Republican, Christian, not Christian. Like, no matter what group we're a part of, you can find shitty people doing shitty things in every single group. There is not a group in the world, political, religious, societal, cultural, that did not do or maybe is not doing terrible things. So you can't avoid bad people. We can't avoid bad people doing bad things. You have to believe in something fervently enough. You have to believe that it should be changed and reformed enough to like stay in and say, okay, I'm okay getting some shit on me. Like, I'm okay getting some I think it was, not that I'm a huge St. Augustine fan, but I think he said, what did he say? He said, the church is a whore and she's my mother. Like, he literally was like, my mom's a whore, but she's mom. Yep. And so stick by mom, like,
totally
bad things happening, got to stay in it. And so it's a weird time, and I don't quite know how I feel about it all. And I'm trying to stay in, I'm trying to stay faithful. I'm trying to do what I think Jesus, I'm trying to figure out what Jesus is doing in the world, and trying to align with that. Just trying to get on board with that and not get mixed up in the fact that another Jesus follower named, and again, that's in air quotes, Jerry Falwell Jr., like, it's all coming out, sits in the corner of a room while this dude's banging his wife and he's okay with it, and all these scandals. And now he gets a $10 million payout from this, I mean, just scandal ridden to the nth degree. Thousands of Liberty students have been expelled for wearing short skirts and for making out with their boyfriends. And now the president, the guy leading the whole thing, horrific scandals, and he gets paid 10 million. So you look at that and you're like, how do I stay in this? Like, how do I even remotely associate with this and say, no, there's some good ones. Like, there's some good ones in there, So it's super hard. As we wrap up, I want people I'll link to your memoir, your book in there. Anything else you want people to go find out about you? What do you want them to go follow? What are the links? All that stuff. Yeah. It's your few minutes. Tell people to go follow all your stuff.
Well, I am at Kristen Howerton on Twitter, on Facebook, and on Instagram. And then my website is KristenHowerton.com.
And the book it's great. You're a fantastic writer. You really are. Like, super engaging. And I read a lot, so I know a good writer when I read one. And super, super fun. Thank you for spending some time with us today. Thank you for kind of giving us an insight on you raising this really beautiful mixed family. Thank you for helping us get more insights into how to raise anti-racist children, how to raise kids that truly do give a damn. And hoping to do this again sometime, maybe next book or next whatever.
Yeah,
We'll figure out another reason to talk at some point. I enjoyed this. Thanks so much.
Great.
That's the show today, friends. A huge thanks to Kristen Howerton for joining me on the Let's Give a Damn podcast. You can find her book, blog, social media, all of that and more at KristenHowerton.com. Visit letsgiveadamn.fm for show notes and links and to find other great episodes of this podcast. And thank you so much for listening. Seriously, I'm honored that you listen to these conversations. I'm honored that you show up week after week. I created this show. Chad Snavely produced it. Let's Give a Damn is part of the Matter Media family. You can reach me anytime and for any reason at hello@letsgiveadamn.com. Seriously, I'd love to hear from you. Sending so much love and peace and light to each one of you. Stay safe. Keep giving a damn. Bye for now.